So today I wanted to just like as a little agenda to talk about what led you into, and I don't know everything that you got into, but I know it was like toxic relationships and just toxic lifestyle habits in
Mhm.
general. So to get like a background on what led you into that, and then your testimony of how Jesus saved you slash when you really knew that Jesus was real and Jesus was God, um, and then what's changed since then. So
Oh, girl. Okay. So I'll try, I'll try not to make this too long. Um, so I guess the way I usually start is that I struggled with codependency like tremendously in my life. I grew up without a dad,
mm,
and when I was little, so I didn't have a lot of male teachers, like nobody in my life that taught me how I was supposed to be treated by a male. So my first teachers were little boys
mm,
that, when I first started to be interested in boys, that told me I'd go out with you if you lost weight. So between things like that and our culture teaching us that our body is the most important thing in the world and our
mm,
appearances and romance and sex, that is what I learned about having relationships with men. So I grew up believing that my appearance, my body was the most important thing in the world.
mm,
I did grow up in the church with my grandmother, and it was wonderful. She died when I was 12, and then I got out of it. I stopped going to church, and so I didn't know God as a young adult, and then until I was 32, which we'll get to that. But so in that time, I had this belief system that I was only worthy if I looked a certain way, if I was sexy, if I did all of these things that the world tells you is important. So I got into a really unhealthy relationship. I grew up in Vermont, and I got into a really unhealthy relationship here in my early 20s. It was with a narcissist,
mhm,
and that ended with a restraining order. And I ended up moving to Arizona, kind of to get away from this person because my best friend decided she wanted to move out there. So I was like, I'm gonna go with you.
yeah,
So I ended up living in Arizona for 9 years. And
mhm,
as you know, that is a there's a lot of temptation in Arizona. There's a lot of things to do.
yeah,
In the Phoenix area, there's a lot of bars, there's a lot of nightlife, there's a lot of young people. And so
mhm,
I spent my from 23 to 32 in Arizona, and still with that same um, mindset and the same beliefs where I
mm,
was going to, I needed to attract a man all the time. I either needed to be in a relationship or I needed to be, doing whatever. When I wasn't in a relationship, I needed to constantly get attention from men. And unfortunately, that meant for me lots of hookups and just like lots of drinking, lots of partying. Um, and that is also like part of my codependency is not only did I feel like I needed a man to need me. I wanted to feel needed by a man, and I had this like idea that I could fix them because I always had this really big heart, and um so yeah, I mean my life in Arizona was several toxic relationships, um just a lot of toxic behavior. And at the end, in 2017, I met somebody. He ended up being another narcissist. And like, it was just the worst relationship I had ever been in.
mm,
And I ended up giving, because I had my own place. I had a great job. I had my own place. I was very much independent. And I ended up leaving my apartment because he asked me to move in with him. And so I ended up moving in with him, and then I was trying to build a coaching business, so I didn't have like a consistent income. And we had all these plans, and he was treating, I mean, he was a terribly screwed up human being. I pray for him. But at the end of 2018, he told me all of a sudden, just in the kitchen, I remember, I don't love you anymore. And I remember sobbing. I was so brainwashed and I was so codependent. I just remember sobbing and like begging him to fall back in love with me. It was terrible. And it ended up I ended up he ended up kicking me out and I had nowhere to go. So the only place I could go to was back in with my mom back here in Vermont. So within like 3 or 4 days, I had to pack up a U-Haul and drive across country and move back in with my mom. And I had just gotten a puppy that I had to leave there. I
Mm.
had to leave half of my stuff because I couldn't fit it in the U-Haul. So
Yeah.
I don't know where any of that went. But it was an awful experience. And I had started to get so sick at the end of that relationship. I was so mentally and emotionally unwell that it started manifesting physically to the point where I was sleeping like 16 hours a day.
Wow.
I like little things like brushing my teeth were so hard. Or making the bed, I just like cried because I had no energy.
Mhm.
And my body would swell up anytime he was around and he was angry. My hands and my feet would get really swollen. He actually drove me across country.
He drove you after he broke up with you?
Yeah, that was an awful and it was terrible. And this is at one point he we were on the highway and he started freaking out on me for some reason and I started crying and he I had my dog in between us and he swerved over to the side and like threw his hands. I guess I probably should have said trigger warning, but like threw his hands over my mouth and was just screaming in my face. Like that's the kind of stuff that was happening on the way home. So it was lovely.
Mm.
So that night I remember we were in a hotel room and he was icing me out. He wouldn't speak to me at all. And that was something that he did frequently. And
Mhm.
I looked in the mirror and my ankles were like this big because I was just so stressed out all the time. And that's just what happened. So anyway, I came home. In the next 6 months, I was devastated and I fell into a really, really deep depression and I had nothing left and I felt like I lost my identity and I didn't know anything about nothing seemed real to me anymore. I didn't know what the truth about myself or about life was.
Yeah.
And so and then that's when I was saved because I had nowhere to turn and I just felt one night this overwhelming tug to cry out to God and I didn't even know if I believed in God because I had been kind of like in the new agey space too
Okay.
for a while. Like I had gotten back into spirituality, but it was more like the universe.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you that if you had any kind of spiritual life at all while you were in Arizona.
Yeah. Yeah, I got into it when I started coaching. Um and then when I started because I have my certification as an eating psychology coach and in that program they teach you a lot about the spiritual part of actually eating, which is really cool, but that got me into it, but it was all very much like whatever you want to believe in, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
So
Mm.
but yeah, one night I just remember praying and I can't even tell you. I don't know what your experience was like, but I had this overwhelming sense of comfort that I hadn't felt in months and just all of this energy. It was like 8:30 at night and I knew that I had to get up and go to my closet to unpack and this was probably 2 months after I moved home. I
Okay.
hadn't unpacked yet because I was so desperate to get back to Arizona because I was still so attached to it. Um in spite of how toxic it was.
So you thought you were gonna move back still at this point?
Oh my gosh, for the first year, I still wanted to move back. Like I had a lot of healing to do. But I was also working on my relationship with God in that first year. So obviously, um it moved me in the right direction.
Yeah.
But I got up and I went to my closet and I moved a bag that had been really sturdy the entire time I had it, had a bunch of books in it, and the bottom dropped, a corner ripped open and a book fell at my feet and it's called Writing Down Your Soul by Janet Connor. And basically she teaches you how to journal to connect with yourself.
Mhm.
And in the book, she teaches you, like, it could be considered new agey because she teaches you, like, to connect to self, to connect to the
Mhm.
universe, to connect to whatever. But I just felt compelled to write God. So I started journaling every day for at least 3 months straight. I journaled every day and I wrote, "Dear God." And a lot of those pages were, "I hate you. Why are you doing this to me?" I was so angry. Um, Man, going back and reading the journals now is just insane.
Wow.
But after that, it was just one thing after another. I started listening to sermons, and then I started finding more resources on the Christian faith, and God brought really amazing people into my life, and I started healing.